A not uncommon issue in Final Fantasy XIV is that sometimes you meet less than friendly players that sometimes engage in prohibited activities. Often, and hopefully most of the time, these kinds of conflicts can be resolved with civility and respect. However, occasionally, the only option left is to report the player to hopefully influence their future behavior. Now, in Final Fantasy XIV, it is not super intuitive or fast or easy to report someone, even for prohibited activities. I believe this is to dissuade players from aggressively reporting people for insignificant infractions. As the Prohibited Activities page on the Final Fantasy XIV Support Center outlines itself, players should err on the side of caution and treat other players with civility and respect. Meaning, of course, that you should try to resolve conflicts respectfully with your fellow player, rather than immediately reaching for the report button on the smallest infraction. However, I know a significant amount of players that don't even know where to begin to report a player, so let's go over that now. To reach the report menu, press the System button, by default found in the bottom right, with the FFXIV icon, then choose Support Desk. Here, you might already find a lot of guidance under the frequently asked questions, including prohibited activities like I mentioned earlier. I have been told that these three specific menus don't show for all players at the get-go, but if they do, they can sometimes help you specify what kind of report you're aiming for. Anyway, did you know that violating agreements between players is automatically considered a scam and is reportable? This means, for example, that agreeing to a certain way to distribute loot in a Savage raid, assuming the agreement is made in-game and not on, for example, Discord, is binding and you can get punished for breaking that agreement. Assuming you can find these three frequently asked question options, then there are multiple ways to go about reporting if you want to be super specific when giving your report. But as long as you use a method that is at least mostly accurate, it should be fine, as the Game Masters for Final Fantasy XIV are, at least to my knowledge, people and not automated systems. And so, if you were slightly off, the Game Master can surely correct it. The simplest way to go about reporting someone doing prohibited activities is to go to the Contact Us submenu and choose the Report Harassment option. For the sake of this demonstration, we will use this option. Now, you have to fill in the information you have on the incident. Sometimes, some of these sections are irrelevant, in which case the best you can do is either explain why that is or leave it empty. First, start by filling in the character's name and homeworld. I like to use the @ sign to distinguish character name and world. It is important that the name and world are accurate, as otherwise the Game Master may have a hard time tracking down whoever the person even is. If you want to be extra sure, it might not be a bad idea to also include the data center, although that should be obvious given the world. Then, if the incident happened somewhere on a specific world, like Ragnarok, then fill this in alongside where specifically it happened in the world, say, Old Gridania in the Black Shroud, for example. If instead it happened in a duty, the best you can do is explain what duty that was, and probably add the data center you are in, as the Game Master can't be sure it would be specifically on your home data center. As much information as you can give. Then add the time the incident happened, as close to as possible. I do recommend specifying a time zone, although I personally always adjust to server time. I also include that I mean server time. This may make it easier for the Game Master. If you're not sure what server time means, locate the server info HUD element on your screen, which shows what world you are on, your connection in some vague detail, and then what time it is. Clicking on the time will flip through three types of time tracking the game offers: Eorzea time, ET, local time, LT, and server time, ST. Eorzea time is the literal in-game, in-universe time of the day and passes quite quickly, not super helpful for a report, but very helpful if you're gathering and waiting for a specific spawn. Local time refers to what time it supposedly is local to you, and server time is what time it is according to the server, which can be helpful to take note of since, for example, the daily and weekly resets happen based on this server time and is always consistent regardless of whether your specific country has summer and winter time, for example. Server time is always GMT plus 0 or UTC, which is the same. Back to the report. Now, you describe the actual incident that happened as best you can. This part is a lot more important in incidents where the infraction is non-verbal. For example, if the player is intentionally griefing by messing up mechanics on purpose in a dungeon or raid, or if they AFK or feed enemy teams in a PvP match. It is also extremely important that you say exactly what happened in detail, as given that I do not know what the Game Masters can or cannot see, your retelling of the situation might be all they have to go on. Again, as much information as you can give. After that, you have a section to paste chat window messages. This is more helpful if the offending player said something in relation to the infraction, if they verbally harassed you or perhaps flat out admitted to the infraction in chat. If you use timestamps in your chat log, I would recommend correcting these to server time too, if you corrected the date and time to server time. I also recommend including your responses to the conversation when pasting too, which of course also leads back to treating other players with civility and respect. If you're reporting someone else for inappropriate behavior, naturally, you can't also participate in inappropriate behavior either. Additionally, it is very likely that the Game Master can find what you said if you decide to leave it out, so it is better to simply be honest up front, right? Finally, add the chat modes used for the comments made by the player. For example, if they responded in party chat, add that. Remember to title your report with something that could work as a summary. AFK in Onsala Kaya, or repeatedly intentionally griefing in the striking tree hard, or whatever could happen. Then hit finish. Now, eventually you will get a response that a Game Master has taken care of your report. You will usually never be told what is done about it, which is fair. Naturally, the aim of reporting prohibited activity is with the intent of getting the person to not do that in the future, not necessarily to get them suspended or something. With that said, let's take a look at some of the more specific options for reports. From the Information submenu, choose the GM Service main menu. From here, you have options to report a handful of specific things, and conveniently also the one-time item restoration service. A particularly important one where you might find yourself the most helpless is actually found here. Choose the Report Inappropriate Behavior option, then choose Report Abuse of the Vote Dismiss feature. This is the option to report for if you get kicked from a party for no good reason. You must keep in mind that when engaging the Vote Dismiss feature itself, the initiating player has to choose a reason for the dismissal, and because it's funny or I don't like their outfit are actually not options in that list. There are some grey areas in regards to playstyle disagreements, such as if the party disagrees on how much to pull, but I will not get into that because I think that who is in the right in such a situation can vary heavily depending on the more subtle details. I advise against using the vote kick feature for anything that can ultimately be boiled down to they're bad at the game, as that is not a legitimate reason to kick someone. And to finish, let's talk about some very common issues that you may not realize are prohibited activities in Final Fantasy XIV, but are perfectly acceptable in other games. Most of these are related to PvP specifically. If you've done a significant amount of crystalline conflict, you may have received the Dunce Hat marker, where someone repeatedly adds and removes a marker over your character to point out that you did something bad, according to them. This is nuisance behavior. This also includes spamming quick chats and macros. Unsurprisingly, spamming in general falls under this, so if you like to spam an emote for the visual aspect, do make sure to use the option to not display the log message. A particular nuance of the AFK in a duty or PvP area is to disconnect at the start and then returning around when whatever content is expected to be close to finished. This is more common in content where the vote dismiss option doesn't exist, like Delubrum Reginae. You may also wonder how come there is so limited amount of advertising in the party finder, if you ignore the clubs. Simply put, it is reportable to advertise the sale of help in the party finder, such as dungeon clears, raid boosts and the like. Take note, however, that advertising the purchase of help is totally allowed and okay though. If you are ever uncertain whether some activity you're doing is allowed in Final Fantasy XIV, refer to the Prohibited Activities page. It has a lot of real examples in the explanations and the unfoldable key points for each type of activity. It is worth pointing out that a lot of otherwise prohibited activities may be allowed if everyone involved are okay with it. Which is also why it is important to remember that there is no reason to report something just because someone might find it offensive, but only if you found it offensive or hurtful yourself. If you need help figuring out if something specific is prohibited, you're also welcome to ask in the comments, and maybe we can figure it out together. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, when Crystalline Conflict was added to the game, a lot of examples were highlighted as prohibited behavior to explain that things that might be acceptable in other games are not allowed here, seen as poor sportsmanship. Two particular examples were teabagging enemies, or allies, or throwing fireworks at them, despite how funny it sounds. Honestly, in most cases I feel that I would more likely find it funny or silly that someone throws fireworks at me than outright annoying, but rules are rules.